Dear listeners, welcome to tonight's Miss Marple mystery. I'm Davis, your host for this evening. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Is it raining where you are, or quiet as Street Mary Mead at dusk? And most importantly, what tea is in your cup? Chamomile, Earl Grey, or something mysterious? Share it below, I always love knowing. Now, let's get cozy, settle in your chair, and begin. Morning in Street Mary Mead. The village lay still. A thin frost touched the hedges. The church bell sounded 8 times. The air smelled of fresh toast from the vicarage. Smoke drifted lightly from chimneys. Miss Marple stood in her small garden. She wore her shawl. Pruning shears in hand, she trimmed a stubborn branch. Her movements were slow, precise, without waste. Logic first, beauty after. That was her way. Across the lane, Mrs. Bantry waved, her hat tilted, her scarf untied. She called, "Morning, Jane. You've heard the news?" Marple looked up. Her tone stayed mild. "What news, Dolly?" Mrs. Bantry crossed over, breath visible in the chill. "The church ladies are in a state." Mrs. Clement missed choir practice again. "Ah," said Marple, clipping one last rose stem. "She's often late." "Not this time," Bantry whispered. "Didn't come home at all." Marple said nothing. She placed the shears on the wall. Inside, the kettle began to hum. Sound steady, like thought. She poured 2 cups when Bantry followed her in. Toast popped from the old metal toaster. Butter spread smoothly, no hurry. "Perhaps she's gone visiting," Marple said. "Her sister's in Tunbridge Wells." Bantry shook her head. Her bicycle still outside, teapot cold on the table, curtains drawn since last night. Marple listened. Each word settled like dust. She had seen it before, quiet mornings turning strange. Bantry stirred her tea, eyes shifting. "I shouldn't gossip," she muttered. Marple smiled faintly. "In Street Mary Mead, dear, gossip is a form of evidence." A clock chimed from the hall. Its echo felt longer than usual. Marple looked toward the window. The frost had melted where sunlight touched the glass. A single robin pecked at crumbs on the sill. "Still," Marple said softly, "one mustn't assume trouble before proof." Bantry nodded, but her fingers tapped the cup rim. Her logic was fading into worry. Marple rose, gathering her gloves. "I'll walk to the post office later," she said. "Perhaps there's a note, or someone has seen her." Bantry hesitated. "Do that, Jane, but hurry." Marple paused at the door. The air carried the faint scent of burnt toast. She frowned. A small, logical observation: someone had been distracted. Outside, the frost had lifted, but the village no longer felt quite calm. Bantry's voice followed from the gate. "And no one," she said, "has seen her since last night." By mid-morning, the talk had begun. Quiet at first. Then it spread. Through the bakery, the post office, the small green where children played. Mrs. Clement's absence had become everyone's concern. At the grocer's, Mrs. Bantry spoke in lowered tones. "She never misses choir practice. Not in 20 years. Mr. Prowse, the grocer, nodded without looking up. "She came in yesterday for flour," he said. "Paid exact. Smiled. Perfectly normal." He folded a paper bag. Neat corners. Sharp crease. Nothing strange about that. Marple entered quietly, gloves still damp from the garden. She greeted both, soft as always. "Morning." Still no sign of her. Bantry shook her head. Not a word. Her house locked, curtains drawn. Marple's eyes moved to the window. The light there had shifted. The sound of the kettle whistled from the back of the shop. "One must consider," she said, "whether absence means danger or decision." Prowse frowned. Decision? She might have gone somewhere unexpected. A letter, perhaps. "No letters," said Bantry. "Postmistress said so." Marple nodded slowly. Each fact stacked in order. Actions first, feelings after. Routine, broken. No message. No witness. Outside, the bell of the church struck the 1/4 hour. The sound carried down the lane, steady, hollow. Children stopped to listen, then ran again. By noon, gossip had turned to theory. Mrs. Simmons told anyone who'd listen that Mrs. Clement had been feeling unsettled. Mr. Wicks swore he'd heard a bicycle late last night on the Vicarage Road, and Miss Dawes from the haberdashery insisted a stranger had been asking questions in the afternoon. Marple listened. No interruption. Only her small nods and calm eyes. Information before judgment. That was her method. At the tea room, the scent of lemon biscuits filled the air. Steam rose from polished cups. The talk continued in low bursts. She wasn't the sort to wander. She was too proud to run. She never locked her gate. Marple stirred her tea, steady circles. Every claim recorded silently. Then she said, "It is interesting how certainty multiplies when proof is missing." Mrs. Simmons blinked. "I beg your pardon." Marple smiled faintly. "When we lack fact, we borrow feeling." The table fell silent. Only the clink of a spoon broke the pause. Through the window, a policeman crossed the square. Constable Perry, notebook in hand. He moved briskly, face unreadable. Marple watched him, eyes narrowing. He turned toward the Vicarage Road. Bantry whispered, "They've started searching." Marple folded her napkin. "Good. The mind works better once the ground is checked." Outside, the sun had dulled. The frost had gone, but the air still held the edge of cold metal. Marple stepped out, coat fastened, mind alert. At the corner, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Simmons pointed toward the vicarage gate. "There," she said, "under the lilac hedge." Marple followed her gaze. Her steps slowed. The constable knelt, brushing at something half hidden in the mud. A pale shape. Familiar fabric, torn. Bantry caught her breath. Marple's voice was calm but firm. "That," she said, "is Mrs. Clement's scarf." The crowd pressed close to the hedge. No one spoke. Only the crunch of frost under boots broke the silence. Constable Perry knelt, hands steady, eyes focused. "Stand back, please," he said quietly. The scarf was half buried in damp soil, torn, a pale scrap of blue wool. He lifted it with care. Beneath, the ground gave way slightly. A shape emerged. Still, Mrs. Bantry gasped. Someone cried out behind her. Marple stayed silent, her eyes fixed on the line of the hedge. Every detail mattered. Position, distance, soil mark. Perry cleared his throat. "Right," he muttered. "We'll need help here." He motioned toward the constable from the lane. Two men joined him, faces drawn. They crouched, brushed back earth, moved branches. No sound but the dull thud of spades. Then the smell came. Faint, but sharp. Metallic. The kind that clings to air and memory alike. Perry stopped. His jaw tightened. He looked up. "Best move back, ladies." Marple didn't move. Her voice stayed calm. "Is it her?" Perry hesitated. He nodded once. "It is." Mrs. Bantry covered her mouth. Someone whispered a prayer. Someone else began to cry. Marple turned toward the gate. "Time of discovery?" she asked. Perry blinked. 10:45. "Any sign of struggle?" "Not yet." She nodded slowly. Logic first. Emotion later. "Then she didn't fall, she was placed." Perry frowned. "How do you figure?" Marple pointed at the scarf. "Knotted under the chin, not torn by accident, and the ground beneath flattened, not scattered." He followed her gaze, brow furrowed. "Aye," he said finally, "you might be right." The villagers watched, frozen between curiosity and fear. Bantry clutched her coat tighter. "She was fine yesterday," she whispered. "She waved to me near the church." Marple looked at her. "When was that?" 4, maybe 5 o'clock. "And after?" "Nothing." Marple turned back to the hedge. The scarf hung limp in Perry's gloved hand. A single drop of moisture rolled from the edge. It caught the weak light and vanished into the earth. The other constable approached. "Shall I fetch the inspector?" Perry nodded. "Yes, and Dr. Haydock too." He turned toward the group. "Go home now. We'll need statements later." No one moved at first. Then slowly they dispersed. Only Marple stayed by the gate. The smell still hung faintly in the cold air. She glanced once more at the shape beneath the hedge. Then she spoke softly, almost to herself. "Someone," she said, "is dead." Inspector Slack arrived before noon. His coat collar turned up. His boots left clean prints in the soft mud. He didn't speak at first, just looked, measured, catalogued. Constable Perry stood beside the hedge, notebook ready, face pale but composed. Slack nodded once. "All right, let's see her." The crowd had thinned. Only Marple, Bantry, and 2 villagers remained. The air carried a single scent, damp earth. It clung to everything: clothes, gloves, memory. Perry lifted the corner of the blanket. Slack leaned closer, eyes sharp. "Blunt injury at the temple," he said. "No blood on the ground." He straightened slowly. She was killed elsewhere. Marple's gaze moved over the body. Her hands folded neatly before her. No tremor, no shock. Observation before feeling. That was her rule. Mrs. Bantry stood nearby, handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Her voice broke through the cold silence. "Who would do such a thing?" "Inspector?" Slack didn't answer. He turned to Perry. "Find where she was struck. Check for wheel tracks." "Yes, sir." He looked back at the scarf. "Not torn," he muttered. "Tied tight. Neat work. Someone took their time." Marple said softly. "That would fit with placement." Slack gave a short look her way. "You think she was arranged?" "Yes, and with care." He frowned. "You've seen something." Marple met his gaze calmly. Her hands, folded too neatly, as though someone knew her habits. Slack knelt again, studied the position. The fingers rested on the coat front, the nails clean, no sign of dirt. He glanced up. "Could be coincidence." Marple shook her head. "No. She worked in her garden daily. She never had clean hands." Slack stood. Perry returned with a small object wrapped in cloth. "Found this behind the gate," he said. He unwrapped it carefully. A brass button, large, military style. Slack held it. Up. "Old uniform?" "Possibly," said Marple. "Or a coat, not local." He placed it in his pocket, then turned to the villagers. "Anyone missing a button?" They shook their heads. Murmurs spread again. Bantry whispered. "Could it belong to her husband's coat?" Marple replied. "He passed 10 years ago." Slack noted something in his pad. "She had visitors recently?" "None known," said Marple. "She was punctual, solitary, predictable." Slack looked back at the body. "She won't tell us much now." Marple tilted her head. "Sometimes the living do." Slack gave a small grunt. "Meaning?" Someone watched her routine. Someone careful. Patient. He glanced at her gloved hands. "You think this was planned?" "Yes." Her tone was even. "Because haste leaves disorder, and there is none here." Slack turned back toward the hedge. His jaw tightened. He nodded to Perry. "Take her to the surgery, and mark everything." As the men lifted the stretcher, Marple watched their movements, measured, precise. Yet one detail caught her eye. Slack's hands, strong, but stained faintly at the fingertips. She looked closer. Not blood, ink. Her voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. "But something about his hands," she murmured, "was wrong." The afternoon light faded early. Clouds pressed low over the rooftops. Inside the vicarage, Constable Perry sorted through Mrs. Clement's things. Inspector Slack leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. Miss Marple stood by the table, her expression calm, her mind moving faster than anyone in the room. Nothing had been disturbed. The kettle rested on the stove, the cup beside it, half full, no lipstick mark. Slack pointed. She was making tea. Perry nodded. Sugar untouched. Marple's eyes followed the line of the counter. Spoon, plate, small folded paper near the bread tin. She moved closer. "May I?" Slack gave a short nod. She lifted it gently. A letter, unsealed, folded twice. Thin handwriting, neat and deliberate. She read in silence. It said only a few words. "Meet me by the hedge. 9:30. No name. No signature. Slack grunted. Anonymous note. Could be anyone. Marple shook her head. No, the hand's familiar. Familiar to you? No, to her. She held the paper to the lamp. Faint crease lines, faint scent. Lavender. A woman's perfume. That was her one sensory cue, soft but wrong in this house. Mrs. Clement never used perfume. Too modest, too practical. Slack rubbed his chin. So she knew who wrote it. Likely, said Marple, or she wouldn't have gone. Perry searched the drawer near the stove. He found another paper, torn in half. It matched the same stationery. He placed it beside the first. Marple looked closer. Same ink, same pressure. Someone nervous. Slack frowned. Meaning? They pressed harder on the pen. People do that when hiding truth. He turned to the window. 9:30, he said. She was found near 10. Marple nodded. The time fits. She looked back to the stove. The kettle still held a trace of steam. She touched the side. Warm, not hours cold. Gentlemen, she said softly. She was home after the meeting. Slack looked over. You're sure? Yes, she returned. Boiled water. Something interrupted her after. Perry's brow creased. Then the killer came here. Possibly, said Marple. Or she let them in. Slack tapped his pen on the table. We'll need to ask the postmistress who handled her mail. Maybe this letter came earlier. Marple shook her head. It wasn't posted. He frowned. How do you know? The fold, she said. It was never sealed. Hand delivered. Slack muttered. Someone close, then? Marple didn't reply. Her eyes drifted to the window pane. A faint streak ran down the glass, as if a finger had brushed through the dust. Deliberate. She turned back to the cup on the table. The tea had cooled now, but she touched it lightly with one gloved finger. The porcelain still gave off faint warmth, a remnant of movement, a trace of life before interruption. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. It was still warm. The next morning, Mrs. Bantry arrived early at the coffee shop, her hat tilted wrong, her face pale. Miss Marple was already seated near the window, hands folded neatly around a closed notebook. Steam rose from the teapot beside her. The only scent in the room was cinnamon from fresh scones. Warm, comforting, but out of place in talk of death. Mrs. Eastwood, the hostess, came bustling from behind the counter. She wore her usual smile, quick and practiced. Morning, Miss Marple. You've heard the dreadful business? Marple nodded once. Yes. Poor Mrs. Clement. Eastwood pressed her, hands together. Such a tragedy. The whole village is talking. Her eyes darted to the empty tables. Only 2 customers murmured in the corner. Her tone dropped. The inspector was here. Asked questions about last night. I told him everything I knew. Marple's voice stayed calm. And what was that? Only that she came for tea yesterday afternoon. Sat by the window, same as always. She looked tired, nothing more. Eastwood's fingers twisted the cloth she held. Marple noticed. Nervous hands. Controlled voice. Mismatch. Did she speak to anyone? Marple asked. Eastwood shook her head too quickly. No one. Just drank her tea and left. I cleared her cup myself. Marple looked at her. You did? Yes. Why? Because the inspector found a cup at her home. Eastwood froze. Her hand gripped the counter edge. She must have had another. Marple's tone stayed even. Perhaps. But this one still held warmth when found. Eastwood blinked. I don't understand. Then allow me to ask another thing, said Marple. Did she seem hurried when she left? No, Eastwood whispered. She was calm, very calm. Her voice cracked on the last word. Marple caught it, a small break, emotion leaking through control. Marple poured tea into her own cup. Curious, she said softly. Eastwood's brow furrowed. What is? The order of calmness. A woman preparing for choir practice would not act calm if late. Yet you say she was. Eastwood pressed her lips together. She said she might come back later for biscuits. I thought nothing of it. Marple looked toward the counter. A row of clean cups lined the shelf, one space empty. She didn't return, of course, Marple said. No, Eastwood whispered. Her gaze drifted to the back door. Marple followed it. The latch was scratched, faintly marked, as though opened more than once during the night. Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Strange, she said. Everything seems in place, yet the air feels disturbed. Eastwood forced a smile. Just nerves, Miss Marple. Yes, said Marple. Nerves can move many things. She stood, smoothing her skirt. Thank you for the tea. Eastwood nodded, clutching her cloth again. Marple reached for her gloves. Her gaze settled once more on the counter, where a single cup sat apart from the rest. Clean. Too clean. Her voice was low, almost to herself. Why move the cup at all? The churchyard was quiet. Frost clung to the stones. A thin wind brushed the ivy along the wall. Miss Marple stood beside a bench, watching the smoke rise from nearby chimneys. Constable Perry approached from the path. Inspector sent me, he said. Miss Harrow wishes to speak. Diana Harrow waited near the gate. Her coat was dark, her gloves perfect, every gesture measured. She was the sort of woman who never spoke without arranging, each word first. Marple greeted her gently. Good morning, Miss Harrow. I'm grateful you've taken the time. Diana nodded. I knew Mrs. Clement only in passing. Still, it's unsettling. Her voice was steady, but her eyes avoided Marple's. The air smelled faintly of smoke from a nearby chimney. One sensory thread in an otherwise colourless morning. Marple studied her posture. Too still, too precise. When people spoke truth, their hands relaxed. Hers didn't. She often attended choir, Marple said. You were there last week? Yes. She speak of anyone troubling her? No, Diana answered quickly. Then added, at least not to me. Marple waited. Silence pressed between them. Diana filled it. I suppose you've heard the gossip. Everyone says she had letters. I saw nothing of the sort. Her tone sharpened. A defense too soon offered. Marple noted it quietly. Did she ever visit you? No. Did you ever visit her? A pause. Diana's head turned slightly. I passed by her gate once. That was all. Recently? 2 nights ago. Marple lifted her brow. 2 nights? And yet you say you knew her only in passing. I deliver small parcels sometimes, Diana said quickly. Through the church fund. Marple nodded. A kind task. Did you leave one that evening? No. She wasn't home. Diana smoothed her glove. Light in her window, though. I didn't linger. Marple's eyes held hers. People broke truth, not with words, but with glances. Diana's held a flicker quick, uncertain, not guilt yet, but fear. Strange, Marple said softly. The vicar saw her window dark by 8. Diana's hand stilled. I must have been mistaken. Marple tilted her head. Perhaps. Logic stayed above sympathy. Emotion later. You knew her longer than you admit, Marple said. Diana's mouth tightened. She was a lonely woman. I pitied her. Pity requires closeness, Marple replied. She looked away too fast. She thought silently, and that was always the mark of someone hiding truth. Diana stepped back. Inspector Slack keeps asking the same questions. I've nothing more to say. Then forgive me one last, said Marple. Did you ever lend her a coat? A coat? Diana blinked. No. Why would I? Marple smiled faintly. No reason at all. Diana turned to leave. Her steps hurried, boots snapping the frost. Marple watched until she disappeared through the gate, then looked down at the path where she had stood. A single thread of dark wool caught on the fence wire. She bent, picked it free, her voice low, certain. She looked away too fast. The day grew darker by mid-afternoon. A storm threatened beyond the hills. Inside the vicarage, the lamps were already lit. Inspector Slack leaned over the table where the evidence lay. Letter, button, scarf, and the brust, folded paper Marple had examined earlier. Constable Perry took notes, his pencil scratching faintly, the only sound in the room. Miss Marple sat across from them. hands folded, expression unreadable. She watched, not interfered. Logic always came before words. Slack sighed. We've gone through every drawer. No diary, no address book, nothing that tells us who sent the note. Marple said quietly, because it wasn't meant to tell you, it was meant to remind her. Remind her of what? Marple's gaze drifted toward the mantel. Something unfinished. Perry straightened. I did find another letter, sir. Behind the clock. Slack turned. Bring it here. He unfolded it with care. The paper yellowed at the edges. Old ink, faded to brown. The writing elegant, older than the first note. He read aloud, My dearest Margaret, you must not write again. They suspect. If you love me, burn this. No signature. Only one initial at the bottom, R. Slack looked up. Margaret, he muttered. That's Mrs. Clement's first name. Marple nodded. She kept it. That's not forgetfulness. That's fear or guilt. Perry frowned. Could R be her husband? No, said Marple. His name was Thomas. She leaned closer to the lamp. The ink is old, but not 20 years old. The scent of the paper, smoke. Stored somewhere warm, not damp. Her sensory cue was faint but precise. The smell of burnt ash clinging to the paper's fibers. Slack turned the letter over. No envelope. Someone brought it back to her, he said. Marple replied, someone who knew it existed. Perry flipped through his notebook. There was a Reverend Ransom once, wasn't there? Before the war. Slack's head came up. A curate here, yes. Left suddenly. Marple's eyes glinted. Then perhaps not suddenly. Perhaps quietly. She reached for the second note, the recent one. Same handwriting. Same. Slant of the R. Her tone stayed even. These were written by the same hand. Slack exhaled. So the killer knew her secret. Marple finished. She loved someone who vanished 20 years ago, and now someone wanted her silence. The inspector tapped the old paper. She hid it all this time. Why keep it now? Because, said Marple, whoever sent the new letter wanted her to remember that name. Slack looked uneasy. What name? Marple met his eyes. The one you just said, Inspector. Reverend Ransom. He stood still. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to pause between ticks. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the fields. Perry broke the silence. Wasn't Ransom buried overseas? Marple's gaze didn't waver. No, she said softly. He wasn't buried at all. Her eyes fell again on the faded ink. The past and present had touched, quietly and deliberately. Her voice dropped lower, thoughtful. But that name, she said, had been buried for 20 years. Evening settled early over Street Mary Mead. The lamps burned low inside the vicarage study. Constable Perry stood by the window, flipping his notebook with a thumb. Miss Marple sat opposite, the small fire giving off the faint scent of wood smoke. The room was quiet enough to hear each pencil scratch. Perry spoke first. I've written down every name, every time, every object. Still doesn't line up. Marple looked toward the window. Because you're building straight lines in a circle. He frowned. Beg pardon? You assume the cause began with the body. It began long before. He turned a page. We have 2 letters. One new, one old. Same hand, you said. Yes. So the writer's alive, or someone copied it. Precisely. Perry nodded slowly. That narrows it. The Reverend's long gone. Marple's voice stayed calm. Gone is not always gone, Constable. He sighed. I'm trying to think practical. Who had time? Who had reason? Good, she said. Now add habit. Who had patience? Perry rubbed his jaw. Diana Harrow. She's quiet, steady, secretive. And Miss Harrow had access to the church, Marple added. She kept its records. She could copy a letter without posting it. He looked up sharply. You think she forged it? I think she remembered something she should have forgotten. Perry hesitated. She said she saw a light in Mrs. Clement's window. Yes, but the vicar saw darkness. She lied to build an alibi. The clock ticked. A log cracked softly in the grate. Marple waited for the sound to fade before speaking again. "Tell me, Constable, what troubles you most about the scene?" He thought a moment. "The cup," he said finally. "It was moved. Someone set it back like they wanted us to notice it." Marple nodded. "Exactly." Perry looked puzzled. "Then, we're dealing with a clever killer." "No," said Marple. "Clever people hide things. Proud people display them." He blinked. "So she wanted it seen?" "Yes, to lead us somewhere else." He tapped his pencil against the table. "The button we found. Brass. Military. No one in the village wears a coat like that." Marple smiled faintly. "Except the constable who loaned his spare to the choir for the fete last month." Perry froze. "Then the coat was borrowed." "Exactly. Someone used it to mislead." He flipped another page. "If Miss Harrow planted the letter, she might have planted the button too. Or," Marple said, "someone made her do both." Perry's brow furrowed. "You mean there's another?" "Yes. The real hand behind it all never entered the garden, only moved the players." Perry stared at the fire. "So we've been chasing shadows." Marple's tone was soft, not unkind. "No, you've been chasing the surface." He closed his notebook slowly. "And what are we really chasing, Miss Marple?" She leaned forward, eyes bright in the lamplight. "Not who touched the body, Constable, but who wrote the story around it." He swallowed. "Then who?" Marple looked toward the window again. The smoke outside curled like ink on damp paper. Her voice was quiet, certain. "We're looking for the wrong person." The night came down heavy. Cold air pressed through the cracks of every window. In the lane, lamps flickered under mist. Miss Marple drew her curtains but did not sleep. Her knitting lay unfinished beside her chair. Something in the day refused to rest. She heard footsteps outside. Slow, even, distant. Her one sensory cue, the faint, deliberate rhythm of boots on gravel. Not hurried, not lost. Someone walking with purpose. She rose quietly, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. No light turned on. Her house sat dark, uninviting. She lifted one corner of the curtain. The lane stretched empty beneath the lamplight, yet the sound continued. Footsteps, fading, then stopping. Across the road, the vicarage gate creaked. She saw a figure pause there. Tall, coat collar raised, hat pulled low. He didn't enter. He simply waited, watching the house where Mrs. Clement had lived and died. Marple's eyes narrowed. Logic before fear. Who would stand there at this hour? Not the constable his patrol ended at 10. Not the inspector he'd returned to headquarters. Someone else. She watched in silence. The figure moved once, stooping near the hedge, then stood again. A glint of something small caught the light metal, perhaps. He turned his head toward her side of the lane. She froze. For a moment she thought he saw her. The footsteps began again, retreating, measured, each step steady as a clock. She waited until they faded into nothing. Then she opened her door. Outside, the air smelled faintly of damp stone and frost. She crossed the lane slowly, eyes alert. The gate still swung open. She looked down where the figure had knelt. The ground was disturbed, a small patch of earth darker than the rest. She knelt. Her hand brushed the surface. Cold soil, soft, recently touched. Something metallic pressed against her glove. She lifted it. A watch chain. No watch attached. Just the chain broken clean. She examined the clasp. Old silver, fine work, not a farmer's piece. More like something belonging to a clergyman or a collector. She wrapped it in her handkerchief. Turned back toward her cottage. The lane looked empty again, yet the stillness felt alive. Behind her, the hedge rustled once. No wind followed. She stopped, listened. Nothing. At the door, she hesitated. Logic whispered caution. Curiosity answered louder. She looked once more across the road. The vicarage window caught a thin flicker of light, as if someone moved inside, someone who shouldn't be there. She stepped back into her room and locked the door. The watch chain lay on the table, silver glint fading in lamplight. Her thoughts arranged themselves like chess pieces. Too many moves, all unseen. Her voice barely above breath. Someone was already waiting. Morning broke dull and grey. The sky hung low over Street Mary Mead. Miss Marple sat at her table, the silver chain before her. Beside it, a small cup of tea steamed gently, her one sensory cue, faint warmth cutting through the cold air. She had not slept. A knock came. Constable Perry stepped in, hat in hand. "Inspector sent word," he said. "They found something near the vicarage path." Marple's eyes lifted. "What sort of something?" "Metal," he replied. "Buried shallow. Might be a locket." She rose at once. "Let's see it." They walked together down the lane. Frost crunched beneath their boots. The village watched through curtains, quiet faces, nervous eyes. Every door seemed half open, listening. By the hedge, Inspector Slack waited. He held a small handkerchief bundle. When he unwrapped it, sunlight struck the metal. A locket. Oval. Gold. Dulled by age. The hinge stiff. One side dented. Marple studied it without touching. "Where exactly?" she asked. "Near the hedge. Same spot you found that chain," Perry added. "No prints. Too much moisture." Slack grunted. "She must have worn it. Broke off during the struggle." Marple shook her head slowly. There was no struggle. She was placed. Slack's brow tightened. "Then why drop it?" "Because," Marple said, "someone wanted it found." He frowned. "Why in heaven's name would they do that?" "To say something without speaking," she answered. "Guilt often writes its message in the wrong place." Slack opened the clasp carefully. A faint click. Inside was a tiny photograph. The image blurred by moisture, but the outline remained a man in clerical collar, faded but visible. Slack handed it to Marple. "You'll recognize him, won't you?" She peered closely. The face was young, confident, with a calm expression that masked too much certainty. "Yes," she said quietly. "Reverend Ransom." Slack looked grim. So the stories were true. Marple closed the locket and placed it gently back on the cloth. She kept it all these years. Then suddenly, it appears in the hedge where she died. That is not coincidence. Perry shifted uneasily. "Could someone have stolen it before?" "Not stolen," said Marple. "Borrowed, to remind her what she wanted to forget." Slack scratched his chin. "So the killer had this once, and dropped it. Or," said Marple softly, returned it deliberately. Her tone was even, but her mind was racing. Someone wanted her to see this before she died. Someone close. She picked up the locket again, thumb resting on the edge. The hinge creaked, faintly. "Strange," she murmured. "The clasp's too clean for something buried in earth overnight." Slack frowned. "You think it was placed there later?" "Yes. After we left last night." She looked up sharply. "Which means someone came back to the scene." Perry swallowed. "Maybe they dropped something else, too." "Perhaps," said Marple. "But sometimes one clue is enough." She turned the locket over once more. Her thumb brushed the back. There, engraved faintly beneath the grime, was a word. A name. Old. Almost erased. She wiped it carefully. Her eyes met Slack's. "Inside," she said quietly, "a single name." The locket lay open on the table. Sunlight hit the gold just enough to show the engraving clearly. Slack leaned forward, squinting. "Name reads Eleanor Ransom." Marple nodded once. "His wife." Perry frowned. "Wife? I thought the Reverend left alone." Marple's tone stayed calm. "He did, but not by choice." The faint scent of smoke drifted from the hearth, her one sensory cue. It mixed with the dust, soft and bitter, like an echo of something long forgotten. Slack tapped his pen against the desk. "You're telling me there was another death connected to him?" "Yes," said Marple. "In 1917, during the Great War, a fire in the rectory. The wife was declared lost. Nobody found." She paused, eyes distant but sharp. "I remember it. I was younger then." The village whispered, but no one asked questions. Perry flipped through his notebook. "Any record?" Marple nodded. Old reports blamed it on a fallen lamp. But the villagers knew better. The lamp was never broken. The floorboards were soaked in paraffin. It was set. Slack exhaled slowly. So, murder. Likely, said Marple, but unproven. Reverend Ransom left 2 days later for mission work. Never returned. Perry shifted. So, Mrs. Clement kept his letters. She must have known something. Marple's voice stayed level. She did more than know. She witnessed part of it. She was a maid at the rectory before she married. Slack looked up. Good heavens. So she kept the secret all these years. Yes, fear and guilt kept her silent. She loved him once. She saw what he did. But she never told. Perry's pencil froze midline. She saw him kill his wife. Marple's eyes narrowed. She saw the fire begin. Whether she knew he started it, perhaps not at first. But later, yes, I believe she learned the truth. Slack rubbed his temple. So he comes back now? 20 years later? Marple shook her head. No, someone else does. Someone carrying his memory. Perhaps a child, perhaps a name taken. But the pattern repeats. She tapped the locket gently. This was placed to awaken memory. Not to hide guilt, but to stir it, Perry said quietly. And it worked. Marple nodded. She met the writer by the hedge. She faced what she feared, and she died for it. Slack straightened. Reverend Ransom had no record after 1917. No trace. Then look for what traces don't leave, Marple replied. Church records, charitable trusts, old property deeds. Money always survives. The inspector turned to Perry. Get me the parish files, and old newspapers from that year. He hesitated. Miss Marple, do you think the fire was revenge? No, she said softly. Not revenge. Control. He burned what accused him. The fire in the hearth gave a low hiss. Marple's eyes fixed on it, watching the smoke curl upward. It moved the same way as the past, thin, relentless, inescapable. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And it had never been an accident. Evening again. A storm pressed against the windows. Wind hissed down the chimney. The parlour fire burned low, its scent of coal sharp and dry, the single sensory cue. Miss Marple sat near it, hands folded, gaze steady. Diana Harrow stood by the mantel. Her gloves were gone. Her hands trembled, though she tried to hide it. Inspector Slack leaned against the doorway. Constable Perry waited beside him, notebook ready. Marple spoke first. Thank you for coming, Miss Harrow. Diana gave a small nod. You said it was urgent. It is, said Marple. Sit, please. Diana hesitated, then sat opposite the fire. Her eyes flicked toward the table where the locket lay open. I told you, she began. I've nothing to do with that. Slack's voice cut in, calm but firm. Then tell us who does. Diana looked at him quickly. I don't know. Her tone cracked slightly. Marple tilted her head. You're lying, my dear, but not for yourself. Diana's lips pressed tight. You have no proof. Proof is seldom polite, Marple said. It comes uninvited, but always on time. The wind rose outside, rattling the windows. Perry shut them quietly. The fire hissed again, a faint echo of burning long ago. Marple leaned forward. Where were you the night Mrs. Clement died? At home. Alone? A pause. Yes. Slack crossed his arms. You said before you saw her light at 8. Yes. But she was already dead before 10. That leaves 2 hours unspoken. Diana swallowed. Her fingers clenched her skirt. I went out for air. Air, Marple repeated softly. In the middle of a frost? Diana looked up sharply. I couldn't sleep. I thought I heard something near the lane. Marple's eyes fixed on her. And you went to see? Yes. Did you meet anyone? Silence. Slack stepped forward. Miss Harrow, the chain and the locket were both left where Mrs. Clement died. They were not hers. They were yours. Diana's breath caught. I lost them years ago. No, said Marple gently. You gave them away. To her. Diana's shoulders fell. She said she would keep them safe. Because she knew their story, Marple replied. She knew they tied you to him. Diana's eyes glistened. You don't understand. Then help me, said Marple. Who was Reverend Ransom to you? For a moment, Diana's mask slipped. Her voice broke to a whisper. My father. Perry looked up, startled. Slack swore under his breath. Marple only nodded once. And Mrs. Clement. She helped him leave. She promised to protect me. Her hands shook harder. He was trying to protect me. Slack's tone hardened. Protect you? He killed his wife. Diana turned away. No. He said she'd found out about me. He never meant to hurt her. Marple's voice was quiet, logical, merciless. Fire does not start itself, Miss Harrow. Diana stood suddenly. Tears in her eyes, fear in her breath. You don't know what he suffered. The wind roared through the chimney again, drowning her words. Marple didn't move. Her gaze stayed steady. Tell me where you were at 9:30. Diana froze. Lightning flashed across the window, white and sharp. For a moment her face looked ghostly in the glare. Her mouth opened, but she said nothing. Marple rose slowly, voice like a verdict. You were there. Silence filled the room. Only the hiss of coal remained. Diana's eyes darted toward the door. Her whisper was barely sound. He was trying to protect me. Inspector Slack. You'd better start from the beginning. Diana. There isn't much to tell. Miss Marple. Then tell the truth. Short stories hide long sins. Diana. You wouldn't understand. Slack. Try us. Diana. He wrote to me. A month ago. Said he was ill. Said he wanted forgiveness. Marple. Your father? Diana. Yes. I never thought he'd come back. Perry. He did come back, didn't he? Diana. Yes, but he wasn't the same. Slack. Where did you meet him? Diana. By the old hedge, where they found her. Marple. He chose that place for a reason. Diana. He said she lived near there once. Said he needed to see it again. Slack. You went alone? Diana. No. Mrs. Clement came. She'd recognized his handwriting. She wanted to stop him. Marple. Stop him from what? Diana. From confessing. She said it would ruin me, that the truth would destroy everything. Slack. And you believed her? Diana. I wanted to, but father said she'd betrayed him, that she'd kept his name to control me. Marple. Control? Diana. Yes. She said she could expose it all if I ever caused trouble. She kept the locket to remind me. Perry. You argued? Diana. No shouting. Just words. Cold ones. He begged her for peace. She refused. Slack. And then? Diana. He pushed past her. She fell. Hit her head on the stones. Marple. So it was him. Diana. He didn't mean to. He froze, like a child. I told him to leave. Slack. You cleaned the scene. Diana. Yes. I tied the scarf. I moved the body. Marple. You placed her as if she slept. Diana. I thought it looked kind. I couldn't bear the look on her face. Slack. And the cup? Diana. I brought it back to her house. She'd used it earlier. I wanted it to seem she returned home. Marple. Why the locket? Diana. It fell from her hand. She'd kept it hidden. I dropped it back there later to make sense of it. Perry. Make sense? Diana. So people would think it was robbery or madness. Anything but truth. Slack. And your father? Diana. Gone before dawn. Said he'd pray for mercy. I haven't seen him since. Marple. He won't come back. Diana. I know. Slack. Why cover for him? Diana. Because he loved me, and I loved him. Marple. Love doesn't erase guilt. Diana. No, but it explains silence. Slack. You'll have to give a statement. Diana. Yes. Marple. You could have told us sooner. Diana. I wanted to. Every night. But I couldn't. Marple. Why not? Diana. Because I made a promise. Slack. To him. Diana. To myself. Marple. And what promise was that? Diana. That I'd never let the village know what he truly was. Slack. He was a killer. Diana. He was my father. Marple. And you became his witness. Diana. Yes. Silence fell. The fire hissed softly in the grate, the only sound. Slack. You realize what happens now. Diana. I do. Marple. Then why do you look relieved? Diana. Because it's over. Slack. You could have walked away. Diana. No, she whispered. Her hands trembled once, then stilled. Diana. I had no choice. The next morning was pale and silent. Frost still lined the rooftops. Inside the vicarage, Miss Marple sat with Inspector Slack. A single clock ticked on the mantel, her one sensory cue, steady and cold. Perry stood by the door, cap in hand, waiting. Slack closed his notebook. So that's it, he said. She confessed to moving the body, covering for him. You were right all along. Marple didn't answer. Her eyes were on the fire that hadn't been lit since dawn. Truth, once found, rarely felt warm. Perry spoke quietly. They're taking her to the station. She didn't struggle. Marple nodded. Of course not. Guilt rarely fights back. It only fades. Slack sighed. She's not wicked, Miss Marple. Just broken. No one is born wicked, Inspector, she said gently. But weakness can rot into sin if it waits too long. He leaned forward. So the Reverend started it. He killed his wife, faked his death, hid for years. Yes, under another name. A man with a different parish. A quiet place far from here. You knew that before last night. I suspected, said Marple. The handwriting told me. Too steady for a woman, too careful for someone at peace. Men who hide long enough learn to write like priests again. Slack rubbed his brow. Then he comes back, needing confession, finds Mrs. Clement. She was the last witness, Marple said. She'd lived in fear for 20 years. Fear binds people more tightly than affection ever could. He shook his head. And the daughter she thought love would erase what he'd done. Love, said Marple softly, often builds the strongest prison. They sat in silence for a moment. The ticking filled the space between words. Outside, the first postcart rattled past. Ordinary life returning. The village would gossip again soon, safely, comfortably, without truly understanding. Slack broke the quiet. Funny thing, Miss Marple. Everyone said Mrs. Clement was a saint. Kind, gentle, perfect. Turns out she was living beside a secret. Marple smiled faintly. Goodness and secrecy share a roof more often than we think. He raised an eyebrow. You mean she wasn't good? She was human, said Marple. She feared shame more than justice. That's the softer form of evil, the polite kind. Perry looked uneasy. Do you think the Reverend's still alive? Marple's gaze moved to the frost on the window pane. He won't live long. Men who carry their own fire always burn from the inside first. Slack stood. I'll file the report, but it won't read the way you tell it. It never does, she said calmly. The papers prefer tidy endings. Real justice is slower, quieter, less certain. He gave a short nod. You think we'll ever stop this sort of thing? Marple smiled, tired but kind. No, Inspector, because evil hides best behind good manners. The clock struck once. Outside, the frost began to melt. Slack turned to leave. Marple stayed seated, eyes on the flame that wasn't there. She whispered softly, more thought than speech. And some secrets never melt at all. Morning light touched the curtains. The village was quiet again. Miss Marple sat at her small table, teapot steaming gently. The smell of toast filled the room, her single sensory cue. Lady Bantry entered without knocking. You've heard? They've taken her away. Marple nodded. Justice moves slowly, but it moves. Bantry sighed. Poor girl, she only wanted peace. Marple poured tea. Peace never hides in lies, Dolly. It hides in truth. They sat in silence a moment. The clock chimed 9. Outside, a cart rolled past, wheels crunching on gravel. Bantry looked down. "Does it ever stop hurting, Jane?" Marple smiled faintly. "No, but it grows quiet." She stirred her tea once. The steam faded, leaving the cup calm. "Strange thing about truth," she said softly. "It cools, slower than tea." Davis's voice returned, warm and steady. "So then, could you have guessed before Miss Marple did? Was it the locket, the scarf, or the letter by the hedge?" He paused, the faint sound of a kettle rising behind his words, the single sensory cue. "Tell me in the comments, dear listeners." A soft chuckle followed. Tonight's truth was bitter, but honest. Another pause. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "another kettle will boil,